This is the second video of the lecture 2. In this video, I explain how you can use divide and conquer strategy to develop a complex program. The complex program that I want to create here prints a multiplication table. There are several rules. First, for each number in this multiplication table, you need to execute only one print function, not two functions, not zero functions. So each number has one equivalent print functions. Second, you have to use the least number of print functions in your code. And third, if I ask you to change 12 to 15 so that a multiplication table for 15 is created, that should be done with the least amount of changes in your code. The solution looks like this. As you can see, it's quite a complex code, but we want to learn how we can develop such a complex code step by step. So my strategy would be to attack something that I can kill, to divide and conquer. So assume that I'm the stupidest programmer ever. I know that I cannot print the entire tables with those rules, but I try to create something that I can. I focus on only one row, not usually the first one or the last one, but a row in the middle. Here I choose the fourth row. And of course, I don't hesitate to violate the previous rules. I start with what I can do, as I said. I create the numbers for the fourth row in the way that I know. In exercise 0 of this lecture, we already learned how to print from 4 to 48. Uh, as I said again, please do not start with a loop. Try to be the stupidest programmer ever. Try to only use the print function to see the expected outcome. After that, try to find the pattern and turn the stupid code to a code that has loop statements. The issue here is that not all numbers are printed in one line. So my first task should be to change this printing from a vertical, presence to a kind of, horizontal presence. We know that by default, the print function prints a backslash n, the next line at the end. So we have to work on that. Okay, how can we write in one line? The print function should be told not to print a backslash n and enter at the end of the printing job, but it should print only a blank space. You can do that by giving a second argument to the print function. So you see the red line, just add a comma and say end equal to with inside to quotation a blank space. You're telling print to not go to the next line, but only add a blank space at the end of printing whatever it has to print. So as a result of this change, the output looks like what you see here. All lines are, all numbers are printed in the same line. However, uh, now we can attack a bigger problem. We want to print all lines from 1 to 12. But I focus on only the first 4 lines so that it makes it easier for me to attack the problem. I repeat the code that I had for the fourth line, which you see at the bottom. I copy that and paste it before the fourth line's codes, and I only need to change the number 4 to 3, 2, and 1. And you can see that as a result of that, the output is like this. All numbers are printed, but after printing mm, 12, I would like to see that the cursor for printer goes to the next line and start printing 2 and 4 and 6 in the next line. And it's the same for 3, 3, 6, 9, and for 4, 8, 12. So the issue here is that, we need to have a kind of uh, enter \n at the end of each for loop so that we can therefore we need to add a separating line, and we can do that by adding a print uh, with the given input of an empty string at the end of each for loop, right after each for loop. So as a result of doing that, we see that all the numbers are printed in the correct manner. However, if we can look at the code, we see that we see a pattern, a pattern in several continuous lines. You can easily identify uh, that pattern as a for loop and a print with empty string. So that means that we need to use another for loop. So this calls for a nested loop. What you need to do is to find the pattern here, find the fixed part, and find the changing part. As you can see here, only the red parts are changing uh, after in this pattern. So what I'm going to do is I have to replace the changing part with a new variable called j, for example, then put an indent so that the the for loop goes to the right. Then I need to add a new for statement for j so that um, it ranges from the first number, which is 1, to the last number plus 1. So this is exactly what we did in the in the second assignment. Okay, the output is going to be the same. That's good. But now I want to create this output for 12 rows rather than just 4 rows. So the solution is simple. You just need to change 4 to 12, and the output is created. All numbers that we asked in the requirement uh, is printed here. But still, you know what the issue is. The issue is that some printed numbers have it's ugly. That's the if I want to put it in one sentence, this output is ugly. And the reason is that some printed numbers have one digits like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but some has two digits like 10, 11, 12, and some even has three digits like 144, 132, 120. So if I want to make this, more neat and tidy, all numbers must occupy the same amount of space as the longest numbers. We see here that 144 has 3 characters, and it requires 4 characters because three characters for the 3 digits and 1 character for a blank space that separates 144 from 132. So uh, if that's true for the longest numbers, that means we also need to have the same format for 1 and 11. So 1 requires 2 more blank spaces in addition to the blank space that separate numbers. 11 requires another blank space in addition to the blank space that separate numbers, and 144 only needs that blank space that separate numbers. How can you resolve this issue, you need to focus on the part of the code that separate numbers, and that part is where you give the second argument of a blank space um, string as the second argument to the print function. So you need to change that part. But how to do that? Let me remind you of some instructions, some commands that I taught you in the first lecture. There you learned about typecasting using str function. You can see here on the right side that str of 144 as an integer will return 144 as a string. So you also learned about the len function, which returns the size of a string. So if you give uh, the string of one as an input to the function of len, it returns one. If you give string of 11, it returns two. If you give 144 as a string and as an input to the len function, it returns three. So we are going to use the combination of str and len to calculate the size of a printed string. Uh, the way that you can do that is just by simply turn the number that is going to be printed as part of the multiplication table to a string, and then use a len function to uh, figure out the number of characters. Then we can calculate the number of blank spaces by simply subtracting the size of the number from 4. So for example, for 144, we just can say 4 minus 3, it is equal to 1. Therefore, we just need to print one blank space. But for 1, the size is also 1. Therefore, the number of required blank space is 4 minus 1, which is 3. So we need to print 3 blank spaces. Now we can resolve the formatting issue. First, we need to calculate the number of characters that I multiplied by j has. We use str function to turn it to a string. Then we use len to figure out the size of that number. Then we use 4 minus size to figure out the number of blank spaces, and we change the end in the print function to to blank space times number of blank space required. So as you can see here, everything is quite great. The formatting is great, but we know that this also should work. This program should also work for any numbers other than 12. Uh, so we can allow users to enter a number and create multiplication table for that number. We already learned how to do that. We use the input function to get a number from user. So we know that the input function gets a string, returns a string. We need to use the int function to turn that string to a number, which will be stored in M. Then we replace all 12s that we have in our code with M. So from now on, you can just, as a user, you can get any numbers, and the multiplication table will be created for that number. So you can see here the output that we have seen for 35. Everything seems to be great. But if you look at the bottom left of this, you can see that all the numbers are in a way mixed together. It's quite, it has become ugly again. And I can say that the reason is that we develop formatting for 144 that has 3 digits. But if we are going to multiply 35 by 35, we're going to have a 4-digit number. So uh, the calculation for, uh, the assumption that we had is not correct anymore. That 4 that you see here, this causes trouble, and this is quite, you see this kind of issues in very professional programs as well. You need to take care of all the fixed numbers in the code. Think, how you can how having a fixed number can cause issue for your program. So this is the way that I am going to resolve the number. I'm going to replace that 4 uh, with a max size, a variable. Then I try to calculate what the max size would be. And I do that by multiplying calculating the biggest number, which is a multiplication of m by m. So if you want to multiply, if you want to have a to have a table multiplication table for 12, the maximum number would be 144. So you can easily use a len to, you know, uh, calculate the max size. And you can easily add a 1 to that so that, you have one more blank space in case, um, uh, one more blank space to separate the numbers. So a lesson learned here is that, a fixed number in the code can cause trouble either now or in the future. You need to take care of that, find a way to resolve that issue or allow the user to change it in a way either through input or through a file, what we learn in the next lectures. But as for the exam, you do not need to follow these, instruction, because these are quite advanced. In the exam, you just want to do what I ask you to do. Another issue that we see here is that what if the user enters a text or a negative number? Uh, we learn how to resolve these issues out inputs given by users that are not, that are not in the format that we expect. We learn how to resolve these issues, in the next lecture on exceptions. Note that if you want to learn this program, you have to develop this program at least 5 times from scratch without looking at my code. You can take a look at my code, but after that, try to reproduce my code at least 5 times. And then you can say that you learned this code. Now, please pause for a minute and try to write a program that prints the following output. You see several stars. In the first line, I have 1 star, then in the next line, 2 stars, and so on and so forth. Note that you cannot use the multiplication um, operator. For example, here you can easily write down a star as a string multiplied by 2, and 2 will be uh, printed. You cannot use that. You have to use either print a star equal to a blank space, or a print, printing a completely blank space or an empty string. So this is the answer to the second exercise. I'll go over this program during the interactive lecture session. In the next video, I will introduce you to branches.